The moment I stepped through my mother's front door that Thanksgiving evening, I felt it. That old familiar chill that had nothing to do with the November weather outside. My twins, Sophie and Nathan, pressed close to my sides, their small hands gripping mine with the nervous energy of 6-year-olds entering unfamiliar territory. Though this was their grandmother's house, it might as well have been a stranger's home for all the warmth that greeted us. "You made it," my mother said flatly from the hallway, not moving to embrace us. Her eyes swept over the children with the kind of cursory glance you'd give a piece of unremarkable furniture. "Dinner's almost ready. Everyone's in the living room." Sophie tugged my sleeve. "Mama, is Grandma mad at us?" "No, sweetheart," I whispered, though my heart cracked a little. "She's just busy with dinner preparations." I'd married young and against my family's wishes. David had been kind, creative, passionate about his work as a marine biologist. According to YouTube analytics, 99% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. But he hadn't come from money or prestige. My family, old money, old names, old prejudices, had made their disapproval abundantly clear. When David died in a diving accident 2 years ago, leaving me with 2 small children and a mountain of grief, I'd hoped my family might soften, that they might see past their disappointment in my choices and embrace the beautiful, innocent souls my marriage had created. I'd been wrong. The living room buzzed with conversation that died the moment we entered. My older sister Margaret sat on the sofa, her husband Preston beside her, their teenage son Carter absorbed in his phone. My younger brother Richard stood by the fireplace with his wife Veronica and their daughter Emma, who was 8. My father occupied his usual armchair like a king on a throne, barely glancing up from his newspaper. "Hello, everyone," I said, injecting false brightness into my voice. Sophie and Nathan wanted to say hello to their cousins. Nathan, bless his brave little heart, stepped forward with the card he'd made at school. "I made this for you, Grandpa. It's a turkey with all our names on the feathers." My father lowered his newspaper just enough to peer over it. "That's nice, boy. Put it on the table there." No smile, no warmth, just dismissal. Sophie held up a similar card she'd made for my mother, but Margaret cut in before my daughter could speak. "Mother's in the kitchen, dear. She doesn't have time right now. Emma, show them where you can wait until dinner." Emma, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. "Hi, Sophie. Hi, Nathan. You can sit over there if you want." She gestured vaguely to 2 chairs positioned awkwardly near the window, away from where the family clustered. I watched my children's faces fall, watched them try to hide their hurt, as they obediently moved to those isolated chairs. Something in my chest twisted so violently I thought I might be sick, but I smiled. I'd learned long ago that showing pain to this family was like blood in the water. "Can I help in the kitchen?" I offered, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere. "We have it handled," Margaret said coolly. "You'd only get in the way. You never did learn Mother's system." The barb landed as intended. I'd moved away, built a different life, and that was apparently an unforgivable sin. Dinner was worse. The formal dining room table could seat 14, yet somehow Sophie and Nathan ended up at the far end, practically in their own zip code, while the adults and older children clustered at the other end. I sat between my children, watching in growing horror as the meal unfolded. Carter received a huge slice of turkey, the crispy skin everyone fought over. Emma got her favorite cranberry sauce without asking, but when Nathan asked politely if he could have some stuffing, Preston, his own uncle, looked right through him and continued his conversation about stock portfolios. "Excuse me," Nathan tried again, his voice smaller this time. "Could someone please pass—" "Preston, you were saying about the merger?" Richard interrupted, loud enough to drown out my son's request entirely. I reached across and served my children myself, my hand trembling with suppressed rage. Sophie's eyes were glossy with unshed tears. She'd been so excited about this dinner, had talked for weeks about seeing her cousins, about being part of a big family gathering. She'd worn her favorite purple dress and had my mother's mother help her braid her hair. "The stuffing is really good," I said to Sophie, loud enough for the table to hear. "Your great-grandmother's recipe, right, Mom?" My mother paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Yes. The recipe's been in the family for generations. It's quite complicated. Not everyone can make it properly." Another jab. Another reminder that I'd chosen wrong, lived wrong, was wrong. Mama, I need to go to the bathroom, Sophie whispered. Of course, honey. Do you remember where it is from last time? She nodded, sliding from her chair. As she walked past where Margaret and Veronica sat, I heard Veronica say, not quite quietly enough, well, at least the recipe will stay in the family through Emma. She's been helping me in the kitchen. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. My children didn't count as family. They wouldn't inherit recipes or traditions or love. Nathan, my sensitive, observant boy, set down his fork. He didn't finish his dinner. Neither did Sophie when she returned, though she tried to eat for my sake. I saw her forcing down small bites, saw her glancing at the other end of the table where Carter was being offered seconds and thirds, where Emma was being complimented on her growth and her grades. My children existed in a void, present but unseen, there but unacknowledged. When dessert came out, 3 different pies, homemade by my mother, Carter and Emma were asked their preference. Nathan and Sophie received whatever was left over without consultation, as if their CON's tastes and preferences were irrelevant. I don't like pumpkin pie, Sophie whispered to me, staring at the slice in front of her. I know, baby, you don't have to eat it. But Grandma made it. Grandma didn't ask what you liked, did she? Sophie's chin wobbled. Maybe she forgot. Oh, my sweet, generous girl, always making excuses for others, always trying to see the best. She got that from David. The final straw came during coffee, which I shouldn't have stayed for, but had clung to some foolish hope that things might improve. My father, expansive after his meal and wine, began discussing the family trust and estate planning. Right there at the table, as if my children were invisible, he discussed how his considerable wealth would be divided. Carter's education fund is performing well, he announced, and Emma's will be established similarly. The beach house, of course, will go to Margaret, with provisions for Richard to use it. The investment properties will be divided appropriately to ensure the family legacy continues through the proper channels. Proper channels. As if my children, born of love, were somehow improper. I looked at Nathan, who was trying so hard to understand adult conversation, his brow furrowed. I looked at Sophie, who'd given up entirely and was simply staring at her hands folded in her lap. And I looked at my family, this collection of people who shared my blood and my history, and saw them clearly perhaps for the first time. They were cruel, not in the obvious violent ways that leave bruises you can photograph, but in the insidious, soul-crushing way that makes children feel unwanted and unworthy. They were willing to punish 2 innocent 6-year-olds for the crime of having a mother who dared to marry for love instead of status. Thank you for dinner, I said, standing abruptly. Sophie, Nathan, get your jackets. But we haven't finished dessert, my mother said, though she looked almost relieved. I think we've had enough. Margaret raised an eyebrow. Don't be dramatic, Hannah, just because you're not the center of attention. This has nothing to do with me, I said quietly, gathering Nathan's jacket and helping him into it. But thank you for showing me exactly where my children stand in this family. What's that supposed to mean? Richard demanded. I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered when he'd become so cold. We'd been close once, when we were young. It means I won't subject my children to this again. They're 6 years old. They came here excited and hopeful, and you all treated them like they were invisible, like they didn't matter, like they weren't family. Now, Hannah, my father started. No. The word came out harder than I intended. I've spent years making excuses for you all. David wasn't good enough because he didn't have the right pedigree. Our marriage wasn't good enough because it didn't come with a trust fund. And now my children aren't good enough because their father is dead and I'm struggling. Well, you know what? They're better than good enough. They're extraordinary. And they deserve people in their lives who see that. I took Sophie's hand, then Nathan's. My children looked up at me with wide eyes, but neither protested. They understood more than I'd given them credit for. You're overreacting, Veronica said. Children are resilient. They don't notice these things. I almost laughed. They notice everything. Nathan knows his uncle pretended he didn't exist. Sophie knows nobody asked what kind of pie she wanted. They know their cousins got love and attention while they got exiled to the sad chairs in the corner. They know, Veronica. Children always know. If you leave like this, my mother said, her voice tight, don't expect an apology. I don't, I said honestly. I don't expect anything from you anymore. And that's actually freeing. I walked out with my children, their small hands in mine, and drove away from that house with something that felt almost like relief beneath the hurt and anger. That night, after I'd tucked Sophie and Nathan into their beds and read them extra stories and assured them they were loved beyond measure, I sat alone in my living room and cried. I cried for the family I'd wanted them to have. I cried for the grandmother who couldn't see past her own prejudices to love her grandchildren. I cried for David, who would have fought this battle with me, who would have scooped up our babies and shown them they were treasured. But I didn't call my family. I didn't apologize or try to smooth things over. For the first time in my life, I simply let them go. The weeks that followed were difficult. Thanksgiving bled into December, and the absence of family during the holidays hurt more than I'd anticipated. But I filled our small apartment with light and warmth. We made our own traditions. Sophie, Nathan, and me. We baked cookies and made a mess of the kitchen. We watched movies and built blanket forts. We went ice skating and drank hot chocolate until our stomachs hurt. And my children began to heal. The sadness that had shadowed them after that Thanksgiving dinner gradually lifted. They stopped asking about seeing Grandma or Grandpa. They stopped wondering why their cousins didn't call. I enrolled them in more activities, desperate to give them the sense of community and belonging they'd been denied. Nathan joined a youth science club, his passion for marine biology, his father's passion, blossoming under the attention of teachers who actually saw him. Sophie took art classes and discovered she had her father's talent for seeing beauty in unexpected places. Life moved forward. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. Money was tight, but we managed. We always managed. I didn't hear from my family for months. No calls on the children's birthday in January. No cards. Nothing. It hurt, but it also clarified things. Sometimes absence speaks louder than words. Then spring came, and with it, the beginning of karma's work, though I didn't recognize it at first. It started with Preston, Margaret's husband, the financial genius, the man who'd ignored Nathan's request for stuffing while pontificating about mergers. His face appeared on the news. His investment firm was under investigation for fraud. Millions of dollars missing. Lives ruined. The scandal exploded across financial news channels and social media. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. I thought of Carter, of how this would impact him. And despite everything, my heart hurt for my nephew. The sins of the father, after all. Margaret called me for the first time in 6 months. "I suppose you're happy about this," were her first words. Not hello, not how are you, just accusation. "I'm not," I said honestly. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Margaret." She was silent for a long moment. Then, her voice smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard in years, she said, "I don't know what to do." "You do what I did," I told her. "You put your head down and you protect your child. You work hard. You rebuild." "It's not the same." "No, it's worse," I agreed. "David died. He didn't choose to leave me. Preston chose this." She hung up shortly after. I didn't expect to hear from her again, and I didn't. But the scandal continued to unfold, each revelation more damaging than the last. Preston's assets were frozen. Their house, the magnificent estate Margaret had been so proud of, was seized. Carter had to leave his expensive private school. I took no pleasure in it, truly, but I couldn't help noticing that the universe had its own sense of justice. Then came Richard, my brother, who'd stood by the fireplace that Thanksgiving night and drowned out Nathan's small voice, whose wife had made sure my children understood they weren't real family. Richard's tech startup, the one he'd been boasting about for years, the one that was supposed to make him independently wealthy and prove he was more than just a trust fund baby, it collapsed spectacularly. Not due to fraud, but to something almost worse: incompetence. The product didn't work. The business model was flawed. Investors sued. Richard, who'd always been so confident, so smug, lost everything he'd put into it. And because he'd been so confident, he'd put in a lot, including money he'd borrowed from my father, who didn't take kindly to financial losses. Veronica called me, of all people. "Your father has cut Richard off completely," she said, her voice shaking. "We might lose our house. Emma might have to change schools. I don't know what we're going to do." I could have been cruel. I could have reminded her that she'd been happy to watch my children suffer, happy to exclude them, happy to ensure they understood their lesser place in the family hierarchy. Instead, I said, I'm sorry, Veronica. That sounds really hard. That's it? That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? I don't have money to loan you. I'm barely making it myself. I'm sorry you're struggling. She hung up, angry I couldn't or wouldn't help. But what she didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that I'd learned to survive without them. I'd learned to build a life from scraps and determination. They'd never had to learn that lesson, and now it was time for their education. The final blow came for my parents that summer. My father's health, always something he'd prided himself on, deteriorated rapidly. A heart attack, followed by complications. Suddenly, the man who'd sat in his armchair like a king, dispensing judgment and cold dismissals, was in a hospital bed, vulnerable and afraid. My mother called me. Her voice was different, smaller, older. Hannah, your father's asking for you. I didn't rush to the hospital. I made sure Sophie and Nathan were settled with a trusted babysitter. I took my time. And when I arrived, I stood in the doorway of his room for a long moment before entering. He looked diminished in that hospital bed. This man who'd loomed so large in my life. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped and hummed. My mother sat beside him, her face drawn and exhausted. Hannah, he said, his voice rough, you came. I came, I confirmed, but I didn't move closer. I've been thinking, he continued, about Thanksgiving, about a lot of things. I waited. I didn't make it easy for him. I was too harsh, he said finally. On you, on your children. You were cruel, I corrected quietly. There's a difference. Harsh is firm, but fair. What you did, what all of you did, was deliberately cruel to two 6-year-old children who'd done nothing wrong except be born to a daughter who disappointed you. My mother flinched. My father closed his eyes. I want to make amends, he said. I want to fix this. Why? I asked. Because you're facing mortality and you're afraid? Because Richard lost his money and can't take care of you? Because Margaret's husband turned out to be a criminal and she's no longer the success story? Or because you genuinely realize that you failed your grandchildren when they needed you most? Silence filled the room, broken only by the machines measuring his failing heart. I don't know, he admitted finally. Maybe all of it. But Hannah, they're my grandchildren. I want to know them. They were always your grandchildren, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. They were your grandchildren when you looked through Nathan like he was glass. They were your grandchildren when you didn't ask Sophie what kind of pie she wanted. They were your grandchildren when you sat at that table and discussed your estate as if they didn't exist. They've always been your grandchildren, Dad. You just didn't want them to be. I made a mistake. No, a mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. A mistake is mixing up names. What you did was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to punish innocent children for my decision to marry David. You chose to make them feel worthless. You chose to let them sit at that table and experience rejection from people who should have loved them unconditionally. My mother was crying now, quiet tears sliding down her cheeks. We can change, she whispered. We can do better. Can you? I asked. Because Sophie and Nathan are still the same children they were at Thanksgiving. David is still dead. I'm still struggling. We still don't have money or status or whatever it is you value. The only thing that's changed is your circumstance. And forgive me if I don't trust that this epiphany of yours is about my children and not about your comfort or your conscience. Hannah, please, my father said. I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. I looked at him, this man who'd given me life, but had never really seen me. I believe you're sorry you're alone, I said. I believe you're sorry Richard can't support you and Margaret's a mess, and you're realizing that I'm the only child who isn't consumed with their own crisis. But are you sorry for hurting Sophie? For making Nathan feel invisible? Because those are the sorries that matter. He didn't answer immediately, and in that hesitation, I found my answer. I forgave you a long time ago, I told him. Not because you deserved it, but because carrying anger was exhausting, and I needed my energy for my children. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It doesn't mean subjecting Sophie and Nathan to more potential hurt. It means I release you from the power your cruelty had over me. It means I move forward. Without you. Don't say that, my mother pleaded. Family is family. Family is supposed to be the people who love you when you're at your worst, who celebrate you when you're at your best, who show up consistently with care and respect. You weren't family to my children. You were barely family to me. You were people we were biologically connected to who made us feel unwelcome in our own lives. I turned to leave, then paused. If you actually want to know your grandchildren, if you genuinely want to be in their lives, it's not going to be on your terms anymore. No more holiday commands where we show up to be ignored. No more casual cruelty disguised as family dynamics. No more exclusion and othering. You'll have to earn their trust. You'll have to prove you've changed. And it won't be easy or quick because the damage you did was deep. We'll do whatever it takes, my father said. Then start by asking yourself why it took you losing everything to see what was always there. Start by understanding that Sophie and Nathan are extraordinary, brilliant, loving children who deserved your love from the beginning. Start by acknowledging that you've wasted years that you can never get back. Years when they were small and open-hearted and would have loved you so easily. You'll have to live with that. They were ready to love you. You just weren't ready to love them back. I left then, walking out of that hospital room with my head high and my heart heavy but clear. I'd said what I needed to say. I'd stood up for my children in a way I should have done at the Thanksgiving dinner. Better late than never. The weeks that followed brought changes. My father survived the heart attack but was diminished, physically and perhaps spiritually. Margaret and Preston divorced. She moved into a modest apartment and got a job for the first time in her adult life. Richard and Veronica sold their house and moved to a smaller place across town. Emma and Carter, those cousins who'd ignored my children, navigated their own difficult transitions. And through it all, my family began to reach out. Tentatively at first, an email from Margaret asking how the children were doing, a text from Richard congratulating Nathan on his science fair win, something he'd learned about through the neighborhood grapevine, a card from my mother on Sophie's half-birthday, which she'd never acknowledged before. I didn't shut them out completely, but I didn't rush to let them back in either. I made them work for it. I made them prove this wasn't just about their convenience or their guilt. When my father was released from the hospital, he asked to see the children. I brought them, but on my terms. We met at a neutral location, a park near our apartment. Sophie and Nathan, bless them, were nervous and excited in equal measure. They barely remembered their grandfather from that Thanksgiving, but they knew he was important somehow. Remember, I told them before we got out of the car, if at any point you feel uncomfortable or want to leave, just tell me. Your feelings matter most. My father was waiting on a bench, my mother beside him. He looked older, frailer. When he saw Sophie and Nathan, his face crumpled in a way I'd never seen. "Hello," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm your grandpa. I've made some very serious mistakes, and I'm hoping you might give me a chance to know you better." Nathan, ever brave, stepped forward. "Are you the one who didn't like my turkey card?" "Oh, my honest boy." My mother made a sound like a wounded animal. "I did like it," my father said. "I liked it very much. I just didn't tell you. And that was wrong of me. I still have it, actually. Your grandmother saved it. It's on our refrigerator now." "Really?" Nathan asked, skeptical but hopeful. "Really. Would you like to make me another one? I'd put it right next to the first." And slowly, tentatively, a conversation began. Sophie showed my mother the friendship bracelet she'd made in art class. Nathan talked about the tide pools he'd been studying. My parents listened, really listened, and asked questions and showed genuine interest. It wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments and painful silences, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, my family rebuilt their relationships with my children. They showed up to Nathan's marine biology presentations. They attended Sophie's art shows. They remembered birthdays and half-birthdays and random Tuesdays when nothing special was happening, except that they wanted to see their grandchildren. Margaret apologized directly to Sophie and Nathan one afternoon, sitting on our worn couch with tears streaming down her face. "I was cruel to you," she told them. "I made you feel unwanted, and I'm so, so sorry. You didn't deserve that. You deserved love, and I failed you." Richard showed up with Emma one Saturday and offered to take all the kids to a museum. Emma, humbled by her own family struggles, was different now, kinder, more aware. She and Sophie became genuine friends. Even Carter, after his parents' divorce and the scandal, seemed to soften. He taught Nathan how to code one summer afternoon, And I overheard him telling my son, "You're pretty smart for a little kid, you know that?" My parents never fully recovered what they'd lost. Not their money, not their status, not their perfect image. But they gained something they'd been missing: a real relationship with their daughter and grandchildren. They learned to show up. They learned to listen. They learned that love isn't about perfection or meeting expectations. It's about acceptance and presence. One evening, about a year after that confrontation in the hospital, my mother and I sat on my small balcony while the children played inside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and purples that Sophie would try to capture in her next painting. "I've been thinking about that Thanksgiving," my mother said quietly, "about how we treated them, how we treated you." "It's in the past," I said, though we both knew some hurts lingered. "I want you to understand something," she continued. "What happened to our family? Preston's fraud, Richard's failure, your father's heart attack. I don't think it was coincidence. I think it was, I don't know what to call it, cosmic justice? Karma? I never wished any of that on you," I said honestly. "I was angry, but I didn't want you to suffer. I know, but we needed to. We needed to lose everything to understand what we'd been taking for granted. We needed to fall to understand what you'd been going through. We needed to be humbled to see what we'd been missing." She looked at me, her eyes shining with tears. "Your children are remarkable, Hannah. They're kind and smart and funny and resilient. We miss so much of that because we were too proud to see past our own prejudices. And I'm grateful. Grateful that life forced us to wake up, even though I'm ashamed it took so much for us to see the truth." I reached over and took her hand. "I wanted you to love them," I admitted. "I wanted them to have grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. I wanted them to have the family I thought we were." "We can be that family now," she said. "Not the family we pretended to be, but the family we should have been all along. We can be real." Through the window, I watched Sophie show Nathan a drawing she'd made. I watched my children, happy and secure in the little world we'd built together. They didn't need my family's money or status. They'd never needed that. They'd only ever needed love. And I'd made sure they had that, even when I'd felt like I was failing at everything else. "Yes," I agreed. "We can be real." That night, after my mother left and the children were asleep, I stood in their doorway watching them breathe. Sophie curled on her side, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Nathan on his back, one arm flung over his head, in a gesture so like his father, it made my heart ache. They would be fine, I realized. Better than fine. They would be extraordinary, not despite the hurt they'd experienced, but informed by it. They would know the value of genuine love because they'd experienced its absence. They would know how to stand up for themselves because they'd watched me finally learn to do the same. They would know that family is chosen as much as given, that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty or love, but choice does. I thought about karma, about cosmic justice, about the strange way the universe had unfolded. My family had needed to lose everything to understand what mattered. They'd needed to fall from their pedestals to see the ground where the rest of us had been standing all along, but karma hadn't just punished them. It had freed me. It had shown my children that their worth wasn't determined by others' recognition. It had taught all of us that justice sometimes comes not through revenge or anger, but through the simple, powerful act of refusing to accept cruelty as normal. I hadn't destroyed my family. They'd done that themselves through their choices. I'd simply refused to let them destroy my children or me in the process. And in the end, that refusal had created space for something new, something harder and more honest, and ultimately more real. Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about purple dolphins. Nathan's hand twitched, probably dreaming about tide pools. My beautiful, perfect, extraordinary children. They'd never know how many battles I'd fought for them, how many nights I'd cried after they were asleep, how many times I'd questioned whether I was enough. But they would know they were loved. They would know they mattered. They would know that even when the world seemed dark and cruel, there was always light to be found, always dignity to be claimed, always strength enough to keep going. And maybe that was the real last course karma had served. Not just justice or revenge or vindication, but the knowledge that we'd survived, that we'd done more than survive. We'd built something beautiful from the ruins. We'd created our own family, our own traditions, our own love. We'd won, not by destroying anyone, but by refusing to be destroyed. Outside, the moon rose over our small apartment, casting silver light through the windows. Somewhere in the city, my parents were learning to live with less. Somewhere, Margaret was rebuilding her life. Somewhere, Richard was learning the value of work that came from necessity rather than pride. And here, in this modest home filled with children's drawings and secondhand furniture, and more love than any mansion could hold, I stood guard over my sleeping children and felt, for the first time in years, something that might have been peace. The dinner where my family ignored my kids had been the beginning of something I hadn't expected. Not just pain, but transformation. Not just loss, but liberation. Not just injustice, but eventually, in its own strange way, the most profound justice of all. The chance to build something real. Karma hadn't just served the last course that night. It had set the table for everything that came after, everything we'd become. And though the meal had been bitter, the aftertaste was surprisingly sweet, the taste of truth, of dignity, of love that had been tested and found strong enough to weather anything. We were enough. We'd always been enough. And now, finally, everyone could see it.